Okay, so with this functional framework in mind, we can go on to discuss some important concepts in psychology. One of the important concepts is the distinction between what we'll call controlled versus automatic processes in this model. Controlled processing, as opposed to automatic processing, refers to processes that demand attention, they have limited capacity, and they are voluntarily initiated and steered. And another word for this would be explicit processing. By contrast, automatic processing refers to those processes that need little attention, or often unconscious. There's an unlimited capacity in these systems, and they're difficult to suppress voluntarily. And the other corresponding name for this would be implicit processing. So some use controlled automatic, some researchers use explicit versus implicit processing. One example of the distinction is a memory example. For items that are well learned, if you know something really well, say your times table, so you know 2 times 2 is 4, right? This can be retrieved from memory automatically. If you're cued with that, it comes to mind right away. By contrast, something that's poorly learned, you might have to search for it, right? And that searching requires cognitive effort, attention. Now, if we go back to our model, we can see what that might look like with our model here. So your times table, see, this is knowledge about the world. So we'll call this sort of declarative knowledge about the numerical world, right? You know your times tables. Well, because it's well learned, then the idea is any simple cue, like a question, what's 2 times 2? It's not like you have to initiate very much of a search. You didn't have to steer your attention and ponder it and expend cognitive effort to drag up that answer. It just came to mind. So well-learned associations then are very accessible to the memory search systems. Now, what is it that initiates the searches? For voluntary searches, it's the central executive. So if somebody asks you, what's the second highest mountain in the world? Well, you might not know that right off the bat. You might have heard it sometime in the past, so you might have to initiate a memory search. Central executive systems are responsible for that type of thing as well. So not only is the central executive system steering attention, manipulating information, and working memory, involved with decision making, but it's also initiating the memory searching procedures. So a memory search we're going to call a controlled process, whereas if something just pops into mind, we'll call that an automatic process. Now, in our model here, the controlled processes are associated with this central region of the model. The central executive system, the working memory system, and what it is that we're paying attention to and conscious of. And the automatic processes happen outside this region. So for example, there's a lot of automatic processing going on in our sensory systems. We are not consciously aware of what's happening here. A lot of computations are going on automatically. In addition, as we just saw with the memory example, well-learned information stored in our long-term storage systems here can be activated very quickly and automatically. We don't need a lot of cognitive effort to access that information. Now let's take a look at another of these characteristics though. Unlimited capacity for automatic processing, limited capacity for the controlled processing. So let's see what that's about. The idea here is that the controlled processes have a limited capacity because working memory itself has a limited capacity. The attention systems have a limited capacity. We cannot pay attention to too many things at once. We cannot have too many things in our mind at the same time. Now, some researchers sort of describe this as the idea that the working memory system, the controlled processes, are serial in nature. You can only you'd be thinking about one thing, then the next thing you're thinking about, then the next thing, right? You can't do a lot of things in parallel. So sometimes you'll hear people talk about the serial nature of our consciousness and our working memory systems, the controlled processes. By contrast, the long-term storage systems have a huge capacity, and it turns out a lot of processing can happen in these systems in parallel. So again, they differ from the controlled systems. Controlled systems is a sort of a serial information processing system, one thing at a time. You can't do too many things at once. Whereas the long-term storage system and the automatic systems can do things in parallel. If you take the sensory example, you've got regions in the brain that are processing touch and hearing and vision, and those are different areas of the brain. They're all processing this information in parallel fashion in real time. And finally, if we look at the other differences, so voluntarily initiated, steered versus difficult to suppress voluntarily, again, the controlled systems are associated with the attention systems, right? So it's the central executive that can steer our attention from one thing to another. And this is what the controlled systems are involved with. Whereas it's difficult to suppress, for example, if we ask what's 2 times 2, it's difficult to suppress that knowledge, the answer to that question, from entering into our mind, right? It just automatically enters into our consciousness, into our working memory system, which we are conscious of. Now, let's show a picture of a brain, right? So this is an information processing model of the mind, but this is what's in our skull. So here's a brain, and the boxes in this diagram have some physical sort of manifestation in our brains. And we're not going to go into a lot of detail right now, but I just wanted to point out that these controlled processes, the central executive system and the working memory systems and the attention systems, many of those systems are located in the front part of the brain. So what you're looking at is the human brain, that's the left hemisphere. So you're looking at the side of the human brain here. The posterior part, the back of the brain, is here, and the anterior part, the front of the brain, is here. This is looking at the inner surface of a hemisphere. But up here then, we can identify the front part of the brain here. It's in the frontal lobe that a lot of the central executive systems and working memory systems and attention systems are located. And it is the frontal part of the brain that is, of the human brain, that has expanded over evolutionary time.